Whether you play Genshin Impact, Star Rail, or Zenless Zone Zero, team building is one of the core aspects of each game. Figuring out which DPS pairs with what support and which element to use is all part of the fun. Normally, you'd want a team that has an element that the enemy is weak to, and in Genshin, similar elements can give you some additional buffs via resonances. In Zenless Zone Zero, there is an additional layer to consider when team building, and that is the faction and elemental pairings. All characters have a passive that activates depending on whether the condition of these pairings are met. On the surface, it makes sense for certain characters to work well with those of similar elements or factions, but in practice, this might actually hinder potential team building. That's what I want to discuss in this video. Whether or not this system will be a cumbersome one as the game develops and more characters are released. Before we explore that, if you want to see more Zenless Zone Zero content, do consider subscribing to the channel. If you have frequented this channel in the past, you'd know that I mostly do lore content, but every so often, I like discussing game design and mechanics. Full disclosure, I'm in no way a theory crafter and I'm not super well informed on team building metas, damage formulas and whatnot. I'll be looking at this from the lens of an average player, which is what I am, so keep that in mind as we go through this. Let's start off with a little explanation on how core skills or passives work. Basically, every character has two core skills. One that works based on their kit and another that works on the composition of the team they are in. The one related to their kit activates depending on their specific playstyle, so Zhu Yuan, for example, gets an increased damage of 20% when using enhanced shot shells while under suppressive mode. The second core skill requires the right teammates to be present. If we take Ellen as an example, her passive activates only when someone in her team shares the same attribute or faction. This means that you either need one other character who is Ice Element or they have to be from the Victoria Housekeeping faction. As long as these conditions are met, her passive is activated. Now, this isn't necessarily a new thing. If you look at other hoyoverse games, they each have in one form or another synergies that exist through the right pairings. Genshin Impact, for example, has team resonances that gives you certain buffs if your team has two or more similar elements. So if you have 2 Pyro and 2 Hydro characters, for example, you can get a 25% attack and HP buff applied to your whole team, not to mention the elemental reactions. The difference is that the resonance in Genshin Impact works purely based on the elements of the characters alone. You can pair a Geo character from Li Yue like Zhongli with a Geo character from Fontaine like Navia and it would still work. In Zenless, however, it isn't as straightforward. Say you put in a character like Ellen. In order to activate her passive, you need a character of either the Ice Element or someone from the Victoria Housekeeping. It seems easy, right? So say you have Sokaku as your support, then both Ellen and Sokaku can activate their passives, since they're both Ice characters. The problem is when you slot in your third character. If hypothetically, your only stunner right now is NB, then unfortunately, NB cannot activate her passive, since neither Ellen nor Sokaku are from the same faction or element. A quick fix would be to swap Sokaku out for someone like Rina. Then at least NB can resonate with Rina's shock element, while Ellen resonates with her faction. But this requires you to have 2 specific 5-star characters to activate everyone's passive. And there's also the fact that Sokaku might just be the better support for Ellen. So in this example, you're kind of forced to choose between activating NB's core skill or having a support that works better with your main. The only way for you to have the best of everything is to have a team of Ellen, Lycon, and Sokaku, which requires you to, again, pull for very specific characters. Now you might say, well, who cares about these passives? They're not that important. And you might be right. If you're not min-maxing everything, you could ignore them entirely and play whatever team you want. However, if you do want to get the best out of the characters you have summoned for, and I know some of you do, unfortunately, you'd have to contend with this mechanic. Some of these passives are really good too, that you really shouldn't be ignoring them. Ellen's, for example, gives her as much as a 30% increase in ice damage, while Zhu Yuan gets 30% crit rate increase. So it can be a very big loss in how your team might perform just because you don't have the right characters to slot in. This creates a very inflexible team building system, as certain characters need to be played with very specific ones, and overall not very free to play friendly. Plus, what happens if you miss out on summoning characters that work with the ones you want to play? Reruns in hoyoverse games typically take about 4 to 6 months to cycle back after the character's initial release. So if you miss the window, does it mean your DPS is stuck not being able to unlock its full kit? Then there's also problems with personal taste. Like, what if you don't like NB for one reason or another and instead you want to use the Lycon you summoned in a Zhu Yuan Nicole team? Well, you can't because Lycon can't activate his passive in that particular comp. I mean, you can, but one part of your character's kit would just remain dormant. All I'm saying is that with this approach, you are kind of obligated to summon for specific characters, ones that are in the same faction with the one you want to play, just so everyone in the team works. I can't just summon Zhu Yuan and hope she works with my Lycon. I need to have Jing Yi for the most optimal team. In addition, certain characters have built-in coordinated attacks, like for example, if you had Kolida and Ben on the same team, Kolida's attack would change. For now, that doesn't seem like a problem since Ben is just a 4-star, but this is a gacha game, and you could spend hundreds of summons and not get a single 4-star that you really need, let alone a 5-star. The point is that for you to play all characters in a team at their maximum potential, you need very specific team comps, and I wonder how difficult it would be to balance these out moving forward when more and more characters and factions get released. Unlike Genshin or Star Rail, it seems as though I can't just summon the characters I want from each faction, as I need multiple characters from the same faction for me to access their passives. Plus, I'm not even talking about max potential as in max eidolons or signature weapons. It's only their passive, which is kinda weird that it's somewhat gated in this way. I really hope this doesn't become a situation where if I wanted a character to be at their strongest, not only do I need their signature weapons and eidolons, but there's now also signature teammates. That said, there are other ways they could address these issues. It's a bit unfair for me to just seemingly complain about things but not offer potential solutions. One way would be to loosen the requirements of these passives or even do away with them entirely. I know from an in-game lore perspective, it makes sense for teammates to have better coordination, but to force it during gameplay is a bit limiting. Zhu Yuan is a good example of this loosening rule as her passive works with any support, regardless of faction or element. So maybe they could just retroactively start doing that for most of the characters or maybe the characters that are coming out in the future. Alternatively, they could add more 4-stars within each faction and across the different roles of attack, defense, support, etc. This could alleviate this problem, though that would require each faction to have all the elements and all the roles, which seems like a steep request. Finally, perhaps they could tune down on some of these buffs and perhaps transfer them over to their kit-related passives instead. This way, you can largely ignore the team building but have access to parts of these passives by just playing the character. Now, let me be perfectly clear. This is not a huge problem, and it in no way detracts from the many things I like in this game. And admittedly, I'm sure most of you might not even care too much about this. As I have mentioned, you could just ignore these things and go for what you want. There's really no harm in that. It's just a little gripe that I have because as a semi-free-to-play player, it just bothers me that I can't access some of the stuff from the characters I have due to the way this is designed. I feel that if I want to pair Zhu Yuan with Lycon, for example, because that happens to be who I summon for, then I should be able to do it without being limited. The thought of having to summon an entire faction or at least half of them just to be able to use the one I want at full strength sounds kind of annoying. But again, it's a minor gripe at best, and I'm not a min-maxer, so maybe this isn't as big of a deal as I initially thought. Also, admittedly, the game is still new, and there's plenty of changes they could make moving forward, so don't take this as some excessive doom posting or anything, it's just an observation. Do you think this limitation should be removed, or is this a small problem and not a big deal? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll end the video here. If you found the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.